and somewhat troubled by their present avatar as administrator. Have you ever had that feeling that things are happening to you that you never reckoned would? I'd like to speak about some random thoughts on art, beauty, performance, before I get into a small AV on Kalakshetra, which was my brief. Dr. Ananda Kumaraswamy in The Dance of Shiva said, "Each race contributes something essential to the world's civilization in the course of its own self-expression and self-realization. The character built up in solving its own problems, in the experience of its own misfortunes, is itself a gift which each country offers to the world. The essential contribution of India, then, is simply her Indianness. Her great humiliation would be to substitute or to have substituted for this own character or svabhava a cosmopolitan veneer, for indeed then she must come before the world empty-handed." Unquote. Whatever we do offer the world is so surely marked both positively and negatively by who we are. It is individual enough for it to possess this svabhava. So where does this Indianness or svabhava come from? Perhaps from our philosophy. We have a philosophy that is unique and which I think tends to wash over all of us, or can wash over us irrespective of our individual faiths. It also washes over whatever it is that we are doing, bearing upon that in a very distinctive way, however distant that work is from being Indian. This can be said to be a collective sanskara, something we inherit unconsciously and by virtue of the fact that we are Indian. Somewhere at the back of our minds, we believe in the essential unity of all life, in eternity, in compassion and intolerance. And strangely, in spite of a new skepticism and disillusionment with religion, yet from generation to generation, there is a constant endeavor among people to understand the meaning of these truths. Even if it is not apparent, at some point in one's life, it gains significance. We want to understand the ultimate purpose of our lives, to know what righteous living means, to understand the real meaning of compassion, the purpose of art, and the value of harmony in our lives. This svabhava comes from a conscious and more often than not, an unconscious acceptance of these truths. In some of us, the Indianness shows less than in others, but it is there, unmistakably. Some amongst us are even embarrassed by our svabhava and believe that to be progressive is to shun it, to adopt the universal image, so that we may be accepted easily by a world community. Does a denial of who we are really make us more acceptable? I'm not so sure. Be that as it may, and in spite of the very enviable collective sanskara we are said to possess, we are mostly unmindful of the value of life and live in constant states of confusion and harmony and disharmony, both within ourselves and in the society that we are part of. Perhaps what we mean by unity in diversity is that every person, thing or action is dependent upon another. This is true for almost nothing is possible in India without many little and big wheels turning simultaneously or one after another, preferably with the big wheel dictating how the small one will turn, or when it will, or if at all. You only have to look at our stories to know how complicated and convoluted our concept of the truth is and the fertility of our imagination. In the epics of India, at first glance, the Indian incidents seem to be like yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Actually, in time-space, it is more like one lifetime, or even larger, an avatar or a yuga that separates the incidents. This is us. In the West, where there is the fabled old man time, but even he does not quite live up to our distant spaces of time. Films that suggest the crossing over to the other world and back again have only just started finding expression. Suggestions that the relationship continues where it left off in a last life, or the suggestion of paying one's dues from previous lives, these are yet to come. The new Hollywood blockbusters still do not compare in range and flight to the imagination of the Mahabharata or the Puranic tales. Only recently, the Harry Potter series are giving us a run for our money, and understandably so, they are so unreal. So where does that leave us? Where is our svabhava to be found in all these dichotomies? in these stories within stories. I think many of us see ourselves as the heroes and heroines of these mythological fables and types thereof, without the sacrifice they made or the feats they performed, of course. Yet the Sati Savitri image is still alive, and so too the Draupadis and the Sitas, the Ramas and the Ravanas. Our longest running serials are either the epics themselves or variations of them. We live on fantasy, on the unreal, on make-believe, or what we wish to be, not who we really are. This, of course, is an actor-dancer's delight. Such an amazing wealth of narrative available at one's fingertips and audiences who understand the nuances of it as well. In such a scenario, what does the actor who presumably reflects or comments upon this complex society do? In theatre, they do the story or parts thereof, or they do a take on it, which is either hilarious or pathetic or blasphemous or bold or different. In music, they feed the story nostalgic like parampara, convention, sampradaya, school, purana, received practice, or riti rivas, customs and manners that were in use. In the post-colonial period, he suggested that a newly defined tradition may well have come as a boon to the westernized urban Indian elite and represented a power block. Aligning with tradition was a means of self-inscription into the body politic of an emerging nation-state. To proclaim you were traditional meant you legitimately claim power in the present due to your endorsement of the past. He summed up in words of caution, though, by quoting Kalidasa's quotes, "Just because something is deemed ancient does not automatically render it sound and impeccable. The wise explore and accept each new idea on its own merit. It is only the unenlightened who seek security in old and accepted convention." As a child in Kalakshetra, we were introduced to every religion in the world. My guru and the founding members of the institute were theosophists who believed in the truth of every religion. Our learning of traditional arts of dance and music perforce dictated that in spite of this universal study of religion, yet there was a concentration of the spirit of Hinduism. Secularists must accept the plurality and multiplicity of India's traditions, including the multiple religious faiths that our soil is blessed with. Our traditions are very precious, not to be wiped out of educational curriculum only because they have a certain religious coloring. I am more secular in the most universal way possible because I have a Christian mother, a Jewish father, a theosophist for a guru, a Western education, and practice a Hindu art form. No one can take that away from me, and it was possible because I was born in India. Being in the arts, one cannot deny the advantage of learning an art from the early stage of one's consciousness. Our crafts, our songs, our languages, our food, these nuances in our lives come early. Our craftspersons teach their children their trade. This does not mean they are being exploited. It also does not mean that they must be denied a normal education. It only means that the child is capable of absorbing both, capable of being both scientific as well as artistic, of being logical as well as creative. Any mother knows that a skill taught early is learned easily. The best face of our traditions, their creative, dynamic, and generative element, have to be recovered. When the secularist stands vociferously opposed to the vocationalization of education, I must ask whether they believe that all artisans and artists of this country possess vocational skills only for the market. Are we humans capable of evolving, morally and ethically? Or are we all on this huge roller coaster ride that takes us round and back again, churning up for 1 trillion years, for all time perhaps a world of hatred and anger? Often in the past decade, one has wondered what it is that wipes out all rationale in the educated mind. Who is responsible for all that is happening to our world? Is it just various groups of people with unchangeable political ideologies? Is it the same one that was revealed to be by my dedicated teachers, by loving friends, by honest parents, by exciting journeys and happy encounters, where all this that is beautiful in life and in living was made apparent through the experience of it? That world came in the form of poetry and music, nature and animals, books and children, but also from the loving care of servants who shared our food, our sorrows, and our laughter. And while we brought them into our world of privilege, we never failed to peek into their world of deprivation, however humble. It taught us to respect their simple ways, their humility and their great pride, their philosophy and their humor. What is this price we are paying for this fragile secularism that we boast of? If we do not begin to teach philosophy in our schools, if we do not celebrate the unique character of multiple religions and identities, if we do not begin to sing our national anthem with more vigor and with a tear in our eyes, perhaps it is time to arise from this slumber and turn what is fashionable around, else the dance will still and the music will ebb from our lips and our hearts. A firm but loving voice of sanity perhaps is missing in our lives, and it has to be our own. The greatest men, the gentlest of souls like Tagore have spoken and left our world. One wants to tell oneself that what is happening today does not matter, but it does. It shakes our foundations, it affects our priorities. The only thing that really matters at the end of the day is the glow of trust in the eyes of a child. What matters is that beauty is appreciated and that traditions are respected, that every religious leader shouts out from his pulpit that there is good in all faiths and that every man believes this to be true. That as long as there is tolerance, as long as there is an appreciation of another man's suffering, of nature's unfair hand, there is hope. I'd now like to just, the great masters from there, they all dialogued at some period of time. This is the great banyan tree that was transferred, a sapling was transferred from Adyar, from the Theosophical Society to Tiruvanmiyur, where we now live, and in 40 odd years it's grown to this beautiful size. It's where we have our morning prayer. Life in Kalakshetra is simple, it's ashramic. Children come from all over the world, but they conform to a particular way of life.
Thank you, madam. Our next speaker is Professor Shivaji Raha. The title of his presentation is J.C. Bose, Prafullo Ray, and Rabindranath, three personalities so different yet so similar. Professor Shivaji Raha is the director of Bose Institute, Kolkata, specializing in astroparticle physics, cosmology, as well as a multitude of areas related to global change scenario. We welcome Professor Raha to the stage.
Match the level of the talks that have been delivered yesterday and today. And perhaps for the same reason, I have chosen a somewhat mundane topic, and that is the interaction between J.C. Bose, Rabindranath Tagore, and Prafullo Ray, all three of whom were very contemporaries. In fact, as you all know, Rabindranath and Prafullo Ray were born in the same year, 1861. J.C. Bose was 2.5 years older. And a man, when we try to understand his creativity, his message, is necessarily a product of his time. So my small attempt is to understand, through their interactions, what brought these three very different personalities together and how they influenced one another. J.C. Bose and Rabindranath were very close friends. In fact, in a recent biography of Rabindranath by Krishnadatta and Andrew Robinson, there is a very telling sentence that Rabindranath was a rather complicated man. The title of the book is The Myriad-Minded Man. And perhaps the only person who came close to understand him was the Bengali scientist J.C. Bose. Yesterday, Professor Dattagupta mentioned that most likely, arguably, the best scientist India has ever produced was J.C. Bose. And J.C. Bose and Rabindranath had very close interactions, except for a small break. And I'll come to that in a little while. J.C. Bose, as I mentioned, was born in 1858, 2.5 years before Rabindranath. They both belong to the Brahma Samaj, although J.C. Bose, having finished his studies at Cambridge and London, came back and joined Residency College in 1885, but there is no indication that there was any interaction or even acquaintance between Rabindranath and J.C. Bose till 1897, when J.C. Bose returned from his triumphant tour of Europe after having demonstrated there his epoch-making discovery of the millimeter wave Hertzian, millimeter range Hertzian waves, and demonstrated the first ever wireless transmission of signals. When J.C. Bose returned, there was a very enthusiastic crowd to welcome him back at Howrah Station. Rabindranath certainly wasn't there. He came and paid a visit to the J.C. Bose's house when J.C. Bose was out, and Rabindranath left a calling card in the form of a single magnolia. We have been talking about aesthetics. I think this is what probably cemented the bond between these two extremely sensitive persons. Even before then, J.C. Bose had been writing prose pieces primarily on topics of science. Bhagirathi Utsasandhane is one piece which almost all educated Bengalis know, or if they don't, they must, they should. What amazes us is the fluency of language and the lucidity. Till Jagadish Chandra, before Rabindranath, we did not really have any experience of such lucid and fluent Bengali being written by anybody else. So that must have been another reason which brought the two together. On a later, excuse me, on a later occasion, when Jagadish Chandra published the collection of his Bengali pieces in the form of the book called Abbakto, Rabindranath wrote that even though you have chosen science to be your vocation, you could easily have taken up literature, and that is something which you would have done equally well. It's also well known that when one talks of creativity, especially Rabindranath's creativity in the field of science, his very first writing, which was prose, and this dealt with a scientific topic. The title of which was Grohovan Jiber Abash Bhumi, in the year 1874, came out in Tattva-Bodhini. And towards just at the very ripe old age, in the year 1937-38, he wrote his magnum opus, Vishwa-Parichaya. In between, all the scientific articles that he wrote, which were 3 in number, had to deal with describing Jagadish Chandra's achievements to the Bengali population, in Bengali. And the story is that in 1901, he wrote 2 articles. One is Acharya Jagadish's Jaya-Varta, and the second was Joro Ki Shaji. The first one was an emotional expounding of J.C. Bose's triumphs. The second one was actually quite a well documented, thought out and labored article. He took up the information from the electrician, which was technically quite correct, understood all of those, and wrote in Tattva-Bodhini, in Bongo. Of all the poems that Rabindranath has written about dedicating addressing other people, he wrote the largest number of poems to address to any male male, was to Jagadish Chandra Bose. He wrote 6 poems in all about Jagadish Chandra. These 4 lines which he mentioned, which he talks about Jagadish Chandra and Boshovigyan Mundir, probably also is a philosophical and spiritual call to Visva-Bharati also, especially today. And those 4 lines go as such. Arbar e Bharot aponate ashuk phiriya, Srodhai, Nishthay, Dhyane, Boshuk she apramukta chite, Lovhin, Sharthahin, Shuddha Shanta Gurur Vedite. And then we were talking about aesthetics. Yesterday, in that riveting lecture of Dr. Kakkar, we heard about not only light and air, but also the importance of mud. There is a rather less read, less known sonnet of Rabindranath, which suddenly came to my mind while listening to the talks earlier today and yesterday. I'm quoting from memory, so if I miss 1 or 2 words, do forgive me. একদিন এই লেখা হয়ে যাবে শেষ, নয়নে নামিবে ধীরে অন্তিম নিমেষ, পরদিন এই মতো পোহাইবে রাত, জাগ্রত জগৎ পরে জাগিবে প্রভাত, কলরবে চলিবে সংসারের খেলা, সুখে দুঃখে ঘরে ঘরে বয়ে যাবে বেলা। এই কথা স্মরণ করি নিখিলের পানে, আমি আজ চেয়ে আছি উৎসুক নয়ানে, যাহা কিছু হেরি চোখে কিছু তুচ্ছ নয়, সকলই দুর্লভ বলে যেন মনে হয়। দুর্লভ এ জগতের লেশতম স্থান, দুর্লভ এ জগতের ব্যর্থতম প্রাণ। যা পেয়েছি তাও থাক, যা পাইনি তাও, তুচ্ছ বলে যা চাইনি তাই মরে দাও। ধন্যবাদ।
To be present in this seminar organized by the study circle Visva-Bharati. This seminar is a part of the celebration of 150th birth anniversary of Gurudev Rabindranath. Celebration of this nature always gives us an opportunity to have a fresh look at ourselves, to rediscover our interest in Gurudev. Whatever our personal interests are, it is possible to satisfy them by studying Rabindranath. That is the reason why these discussions are so very important. And creativity is the essence of Rabindranath's lifelong search for truth. One glimpse at the educational thoughts of Rabindranath reveals that he rejected repetition and opted for creativity. Abir Abir Maedhi, O self-revealing, reveal thyself through me. This was Rabindranath's favorite mantra. Thanks to the study circle, Visva-Bharati, for organizing such an excellent seminar. We had a feast for these 2 days. The Vice Chancellor must be thanked for taking such a special interest in the seminar. It has been very rewarding discussion on Rabindranath. We certainly hope that these papers will be published. Thank you.
Final business session of the seminar. In this session we have 3 speakers, and in the chair is Professor Indrani Mukhopadhyay, the Principal Shongit Bhavan Visva-Bharati. Our first speaker is Professor Shokon Chakraborty. The title of his paper is The Universal, the National and the Social, Rabindranath Tagore and Social Consciousness. Professor Shokon Chakraborty is currently Director, National Library India. in charge of Victoria Memorial, Kolkata, and Professor of English, Jadavpur University. On a personal note, Shakunda has been one of the most inspiring teachers of English literature, and I'm so very glad to invite Shakunda to the stage. Thank you, Chairperson, and also Amrito for introducing me. The title, as you have heard, is The Universal, the National and the Social. Rabindranath Tagore and Social Consciousness. In a lecture entitled Nationalism in the West, Rabindranath Tagore touched upon a theme that to our ears would sound Hegelian and Eurocentric, if not too imprecise to be of any use. It was the winter of 1916-17. Tagore was speaking in the United States while Europe was in the throes of the most destructive phase of the First World War. Tagore's political opinions had appalled the Hegelian Marxist Georg Lukács, was at the moment speculating on the presumable goal of human history. Neither the colorless vagueness of cosmopolitanism nor the self-idolatry of nation worship is the goal of human history, wrote the poet. The statement provides a key to what Rabindranath Tagore would mean by the word universal or universalism in the ensuing years. The colorless vagueness of a woolly-headed cosmopolitanism was what he had been charged with, both in India and the West, by Bertrand Russell, for example, or Philip Larkin, for contrasting reasons. Yet, it was not easy for the poet to outgrow the early influences on him, to arrive at a position that rejected Western nationalism as much as an insipid version of cosmopolitanism. Tagore had once joined issue with Mahatma Gandhi, who had dismissed the genius of Ram Mohan Rai, the founder of the Brahmo Samaj. Rai, one of the great influences on early Tagore, had written a letter to the French foreign minister on 22nd December 1831. As you perhaps know, Talleyrand at that time was the minister. In the letter, he argued that nations should work toward doing away with the system of issuing and demanding passports. Not religion only, wrote Rai, but unbiased common sense as well as the accurate deduction of scientific research lead to the conclusions that all mankind are one great family of which numerous nations and tribes existing are only various branches. Rai was no Hegelian, nor was he implying, like the early Marx, that humans would reclaim their true species being only after the withering away of nation-states. His eclecticism sprang from his reading of Sufi literature and his high regard for the French philosophers and British utilitarians. But Tagore's reflections were far more nuanced, and he was keenly aware that identity was a function of an intuition of belonging, of recognizing a cultural habitation as one's own. He understood the important function of the Western idea of nation and the Indian idea of samaja, but perhaps not in the progressive or dialectical Hegelian sense as some have argued. In Bharatvarsha and in the 1916 essay, Nationalism in India, Tagore did say that development in communication and commerce had brought people out of their tribal and feudal loyalties. Shomendranath Tagore, Rabindranath's communist great-nephew, was quick to plead that such passages indicated that Tagore appreciated the progressive role of capitalism in breaking down the feudal social structure. However, one doubts if this means, as Shomendranath writes,
employing impeccably neo-Hegelian rhetoric, that Tagore understood that allegiance to the national being was certainly a step forward. Such a picture of humankind's incremental progress to a universal rather than national being is belied by the other lecture that Rabindranath Tagore cites in his essay entitled Rabindranath Tagore and Universal Humanism. The other lecture was delivered in China in 1924. Entitled Civilization and Progress, it makes the distinction between quantifiable progress, the so-called steps forward, and the incommensurate values that constitute civilization. Contrasting the spectacular progress the West has made in science at the price of dwarfing of the individual, Tagore writes, "In a few years' time, it might be possible for me to learn how to make holes in thousands of needles instantaneously by turning a wheel, but to be absolutely simple in one's hospitality to one's enemy or to a stranger requires generations of training." Tagore then alludes to the hospitality of the Masood tribe in the northwestern frontier province of undivided India as an instance. Progress has empowered them to extract revenge, civilization to extend hospitality. Hospitality, with its suggestion of openness to the alterity that is unknowable, that has been made so familiar in our times by Emmanuel Levinas and Jacques Derrida, and its cognate civilization recur in the 1916 address, Nationalism in Japan. I'm quoting, "After centuries of civilizations, nations fearing each other like the prowling wild beasts of the nighttime, shutting their doors on hospitality, combining only for the purpose of aggression or defense, hiding in their holes their trade secrets, state secrets, and secrets of their armaments, holding down fallen races which struggle to stand upon their own feet. Are we to bend our knees to the spirit of this nationalism?" In condemning the nation conceived as a whole people, as an organized power, the theme of exclusivity becomes a leitmotif in Tagore's non-fiction prose, just as that of hospitality. An open invitation would join a metonymic chain when speaking of nature, beauty, and art in his writings in old genres. In the address delivered in Japan, entitled International Relations, this is conveniently summed up in a passage. "There was a time when the spirit of the people was hospitable. The spirit has been overcome by the spirit of the nation, with its intense consciousness of self-interest concentrated in political organization. Such an unlimited cultivation of over-consciousness of self by the whole people must inevitably produce its harvest of suspicion, hatred, and inhospitable exclusiveness." Rabindranath Tagore notes this passage in his essay, as he does Tagore's firm refusal to pitch the stereotype of spiritual India against Western nationalism, or to accept the fascist argument of Asia for Asia, as Noguchi, the Japanese poet, in defense of the Japanese occupation of China in 1938. However, what Rabindranath Tagore ignores is that this is far from any Hegelian understanding of the role of capitalism or the nation-state in the march toward a historical destiny for the human species. In Tagore's mature poetry, there is a hint of historicism. In Samudrir Pradeep, in Shonardori, or Tishon, in Bitika, or in many of the untitled poems of Patraput, for instance, there are intimations of a time before and beyond human history, of a collective memory of the race that includes the vegetative and animal worlds. But in Vishwaparichaya, Tagore's science primer, written late in life, he seems to imply all the well-laid plans of geology and zoology lead toward the climax of an idealized human consciousness. This indeed is a teleological, as I said, historicist, and universalist notion of time, albeit not a strictly Hegelian one. One might think of the idealization in terms of the universal as an indivisible consciousness as understood by the Upanishads or the physicist Schrödinger. At the same time, one is never sure that the late poet and painter could reconcile this indivisibility with what he saw as the material coordinates of human existence. Where does the social fit into all this? In the lectures of the second decade of the 20th century, we find Tagore skeptical of the Western ideal of the nation. In the essays of the 1890s and 1910s, the Swadeshi phase, he comes across as wary of the Western understanding of the social, despite his obvious admiration of the freedom, especially of women, he witnessed during his early visits to Europe. What he found disquieting was the exclusivity that defined social stereotypes in a colonial setting. A good instance is the essay Samaj Bhed, published in Bangadorshan in 1901 and later included in Swadesh. The apparent occasion was an article by an Englishman published in Contemporary Review in January that year, which described the atrocities on the Chinese committed by Europeans in retaliation of the attacks on Christian missionaries by the Chinese, of course, who were portrayed by the author as an uncivilized race. Tagore remarked with barely concealed disdain that the Enlightenment brought in by the colonial masters had taught subjects that all races were equal heirs to the faculty of reason, only to revise that lesson where its premise did not suit them. Of course, the Western category of the social was incommensurate for Tagore with the Eastern notion of Samaja. China reacts only when its religion is attacked. Since religion, by which Tagore meant a community held together by ethical imperatives, is at the base of Samaja, while in Europe, it is the political state that held communities and nations together. That, says Tagore, explains why Vivekananda, the first mention of the Swami in the poet's writings, as far as I'm able to tell, was hardly a disturbing presence in Chicago like the Christian missionaries were in China. This was a familiar position that Tagore held during the Swadeshi movement and its waning years, a position developed in such essays as Bharatbhusha Samaj, Swadeshi Samaj, and other essays in the collection Atmashakti. Tagore could imagine a time in Hindu India when the state was co-terminus with Samaja, and the prince was the source of social good. But after the coming of Muslim rule, and especially under the British, the political state had sundered itself from the community, and the Samaja took upon itself the task of its own sustenance. Tagore's complaint in Atmashakti was that the colonial Indian Samaja was being taught to abdicate this responsibility in favor of the political state and was fast losing its potency. At its worst, this position could collude with regressive ideas, such as one finds in the essay Protodharon, 1905, which identified women as the repository of traditional social resources that had saved indigenous society from being blown away by foreign manufactures and fashions. Women corresponded to the inner sturdiness of Samaja, while men were tied to the fortunes of the political state, a comparison that is neither fair to women nor to the Samaja they are supposed to embody. At times, Tagore could also fantasize a situation where the political writ of the colonial state was held in check by a self-empowered Samaja. In the essay Avastha or Vyavastha, 1905, he even cited the instance of the secret courts of the Armenian Nationalist Party of Georgia, which virtually substituted the governmental administration imposed by the Russians.
The title of a paper is Rabindranath's Discerning Balance, Privileging the Poet's Vision. Professor Kathleen M. O'Connell teaches courses on South Asia at New College, University of Toronto, Canada. Her work on Rabindranath and Satyajit Ray has been widely recognized. I now invite Professor Kathleen M. O'Connell to the stage.
Thank you, Rolland. Vice Chancellors Sushanta Datta-Gupta and Mrs. Ranu Datta-Gupta, esteemed guests and dear friends, I'm very honored to be here for this important occasion, and I would like to congratulate Shandip Sabadikari and the Visva-Bharati Study Circle for all the energy they have put into organizing this important event. It's especially important that Tagore's 150th birth centenary be celebrated here in Shantiniketan, which was so important to the poet. It was a place that symbolized freedom for him, and it created a space in his imagination that even when he was far away from home, he could concentrate on Shantiniketan. Chirokal Shantiniketan, as he sometimes called it. This was especially brought home to me recently when I've been going through Tagore's letters from the 1920s when he was traveling so much throughout Europe and North America. At a time when he was faced on one hand with increasing nationalism and divisiveness on one hand, and on the other hand, other difficulties, the nationalism. Anyway, at this point, he would turn to his image of Shantiniketan as a sign of peace, of freedom, of simplicity, and of the organic unity that sustained him in his role as a Visho Kobi. The title of my paper is Rabindranath's Discerning Balance, privileging the poet's vision. And I must confess, in choosing the topic, I took into consideration that the program seemed to be rather more heavily weighted in terms of science and scientists. However, as the program has progressed, it seems that the borders between science and art have become much more blurred. And for example, this morning we had a biologist talking about creativity in the living world of nature, a professor of quantum physics talking about Tagore's music and fusion in it. So the borders have become blurred. My paper really is in two parts. I will begin with a brief survey of the role of the Jorshanko Tagore Bharti in shaping and creating an ethos that welcomed both science and the arts. And in the second part of the paper, I will discuss how Rabindranath assimilated these qualities of both art and science and used them in his educational scheme and his general attitude toward life. Historically, Calcutta was one of the earliest sites in Asia for the dissemination of Western science and education. And the Jorshanko Tagore Bharti represented virtually a microcosm, if not an epicenter, of the creative streams that characterized the period known as the Bengal Renaissance. It was reportedly a Tagore, Anandaram, who first mastered English in the early days of trading with the East India Company. And it was Darkanath Tagore, Rabindranath's grandfather, who would become the first Indian patron and member of the Asiatic Society of Bengal, established in Kolkata in 1784. The Asiatic Society was one of the first centers of Western knowledge in India, combining serious philological and textual scholarship with empirical facts on tribes and races, folklore and the flora and fauna of British India. As well as supporting English education, Darkanath also had an important role in establishing Western medicine in India. He supported the opening of the Kolkata, then Calcutta Medical College, and sent 2 students to train in London. There is an account to the effect that when the first Western-trained Indian doctors returned to Calcutta, they were then facing social ostracism because of human dissection. Darkanath accompanied them into the dissection room to support them. Both Darkanath and Ramohan Roy welcomed Western science and education as a means to fight the social and intellectual stagnation they found in traditional Indian society. Ramohan's letter to Lord Elmhurst in December 1823, supported by Darkanath, represents one of the earliest demands for an Indian national science. Notes from Darkanath's first trip to England, which can be seen in Rabindra Bhavan, indicated great curiosity about Western scientific institutions and personalities. On the other hand, Darkanath's patronage of the arts was equally generous, if not more so, and his cosmopolitan tastes ranged from Indian classical music to Italian opera to Russian theater. This helped form the creative ethos at Jorasanko. Over a period of time, we find the family's attitudes shifting from Darkanath's position of advocating an English educational policy that emphasized Western science, technology, and medicine, to Debendranath Tagore's more guarded acceptance of certain aspects of Western education within a vernacular medium and under local control. Though less enthusiastic about English medium education, Debendranath by no means rejected a scientific approach. He became associated with rationalists such as Akoy Datta and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagore, establishing a vernacular school for the teaching of theology and science. He also supported several societies that promoted Western science and medicine, such as the Society for the Acquisition of General Knowledge and the Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science. Within the family circle, Debendranath sent his 4th son, Hemendranath, to medical school. And as we know, it was Hemendranath who took charge of Rabindranath's homeschooling. Under Debendranath's leadership, the Brahmo Samaj supported Western science and women's education and helped Brahmo women enter the field of Western medicine. In terms of practical science, we learn from Jyotirindra Tagore's Jivan Smriti of their uncle Girindranath's scientific laboratory in Jorasanko, where chemistry experiments were conducted, and of the various battery-operated machines there. Running parallel to the interest in science that is to be found in the family history is a well-documented interest in art. And one can look to Jorasanko for its pervasive cultural influence in literature, music, drama, painting, and other artistic endeavors, given him the insight to see the truth of man, and his imagination to realize in the world the infinite mystery of life, and not merely its mechanical aspect. Thank you.
Of this session, we are privileged to have with us Professor Shapun Majumdar. Shapunda, of course, needs no introduction. All of us have time and again been indebted to Shapunda for his deep insights and his references on Rabindranath studies. Today, Shapunda will speak on cognition of creativity, a Tagorean approach. Our proud privilege to invite Professor Shapun Majumdar, former Director of Culture, Rabindra Bhavan, Visva-Bharati, former Professor of Comparative Literature, Jalal.
Namaskar. I really feel privileged and indebted to the organizers for inviting me to this excellent seminar. A seminar which began with the opening lecture by Professor Shubhushati Bhattacharya is now coming to a close, and I am the tail ender, so I will try to retain my wicket before the stumps are drawn. The title of my paper has already been announced, and I think from yesterday we have been living almost in the ambience of Tagore-Einstein talk. All of you know that both of them were talking about the role of consciousness in perception, and they talked about it on the assumption of a table. Similarly, perhaps we can say that here is no chair, but there is a chairperson. So the situation continues, and many of us might think, even as some of the theoreticians like Kenneth Tynan had done on Ionesco's plays, and particularly you may be reminded of the chairs. So consciousness has played a big role in identification of creativity, and my young friend Dr. Dipankar Home has already done pioneering research on that particular aspect. I am dealing with another aspect which was foregrounded by Tagore, and that is on the role of the personality as a matter of cognition. Creativity has been an enticing engagement for all enterprisers across human realms of knowledge. One may say, as all adventurers in ideas are intrinsically aspirers for a kind of permanence, if not immortality, the creative mind works simultaneously on two planes. First, on the level of experience gathered through a plethora of feelings aroused, coming in contact with external stimuli, and second, on that of expression, particularly of the artistic kind, cutting across arts and science. But how and where does that expression generate from? Is it an expression of an endowed vision, not a permanent feature, in most of the cases, a transitory or a fleeting episode, or a product of creative intuition in Jacques Maritain sense of the term, or that of accumulated experiences and observations? The former, then, in a way, implicitly accepts an external phenomenon or source of power as the agent responsible for creativity, which the latter two positions identify an individual as a sole source of it. A Tagore would qualify, and I quote, "Be that in arts or science, the impassioned mind is the best operator. Arti bolo, science bolo, nirashakta mon hocche sarvashreshtha bhavan." The prudent Greek theoreticians, Plato being their forerunner, did not consider the poets creative at all, since the entire gamut of artistic production was nothing other than an imitation of the designs of the ultimate reality for them. His disciple, Aristotle, was not against the poets as such, but could not come out of the overarching concept of imitation. The wise classicists in the West were not unresponsive to the idea of creativity, but inexplicable or even inscrutable as they found to explain the moment of creativity, they left it shrouded in what Longinus would call the divine vapor within quotes. The sagacious Vyasa, to whom is ascribed the Mahabharata and the corpus of Puranas, also took recourse to such strategies to cover up in his narratives the Satyavati episode being the most illustrative of them all. But Indian estates, from the early years of their theoretical formulations, accorded a pride of place to the phenomenon of creativity. They compared a poet with Prajapati, apare kavya samsare kavireka Prajapati, suggesting in a double honor both Prajapati, Brahma, the creator according to the Indian Purana, and the butterfly which carries pollen from one flower to another, creating fertilization among these in the process. The analogies imply that the poet may be a creator in his own right, like Brahma, or that of the poet may collect, or that the poet may collect, like a butterfly, diverse elements and compound these into a new creation. Shelley, the romantic poet, exposed unambiguously the same mystery of poetic creativity in his celebrated Prometheus Unbound. He will watch from dawn to gloom the lead-reflected sun Ilium, the yellow bees in the ivy bloom, nor heed nor see what things they be, but from these create he can forms more real than the living man, nurslings of immortality. The Shelley of Bengal, as Tagore was dubbed in his early poetic career, developed and honed his position on creativity over the years to reach a theoretical postulation. As is quite natural for a practicing man of letters, his understanding grew basically from his own experiences in creative writing. In other words, his position was only secondarily or even insignificantly dependent on reading of others' works as is usual for a critic or a theoretician. Even then, it may not escape a discerning eye that while reviewing books by contemporary authors, Shwapna Prayana by his eldest brother Dijendranath, Trailokyanath Mukhopadhyay's Kamkabati, or the nameless poets of folk literature in Gramya Sahitya or Loko Sahitya discussed in his books, for example, Tagore had always been keen on analyzing the creative mind at work as reflected in their manner of expression and mode of structure. But the question remains, how and when does a feeling leap up for expression? All feelings certainly do not cry for articulation. Is that then dependent on the intensity of the feeling or on the uniqueness of the experience? Creative artists and critics, regardless of their specialization and training, tend to agree that the lowest common denominator of such feelings is unexpectedness. Kimidam bahitam maya. What is it that has been used by me? It is, you all know that this is in the Mahabharata, in the Ramayana, when Valmiki says this particular sentence, Kividam Bahitam Maya, and then he comes to the conclusion that Shochatuktam Maya Yasmat Tasmat Sloka Vavittiti. That is the birth of sloka in the Ramayana. What is it that has been used by me? It is interesting to note that the voice of the speech is passive, which signifies that the utterance is unweak capability. With such perception of unexpectedness is blended a sense of inevitability. Tagore confided his Amapurichaya, quote, "When I look back on this process of my writing poetry for so long, I can see this clearly. It is a business over which I had no control. But now I know all that writing meant the occasion. A piece is not something that is yet not, something it has not the faintest idea of. Inside the author is again an author, before whom the few significance is present." End quote. In Juvan Smriti, Tagore also recounted the experiences of genesis of the poem Nature shock no awakening of the waterfall, almost in a condition of being possessed for 4 days under the spell of a trance. One may be tempted to draw a parallel with the composition of Kubla Khan. The Coleridge's had been an extraneously induced dreamy state of mind. The most clear exposition of Tagore's theoretical position on creativity, however, is contained in a lecture delivered at the 6th annual meeting of the Gujarati Sahitya Parishad in Ahmedabad on 2nd April 1920. He posited almost a kind of binary opposition between the two. Construction for him was need-based, purposeful, a matter of necessity, reflecting efforts to satisfy certain wants. Creation, on the other hand, for him, was not confined to the bare necessities of life, or better to say, it took shape as soon as it transgressed the limits of purpose or want. The title of the speech was Creation versus Construction. If the former was an expression of the urges of existence, basically restrictive in nature, the latter was in a sense an articulation of the being, primarily generative in variety. Creativity then begins when it comes out of the clutches of convention. But any or all sorts of departure from the norm are not necessarily creative either. Nor is creativity synonymous with all kinds of innovation. Bringing in analogies, as he often does, Tagore formulates his premise, and I quote, "We make a vessel because water has to be fetched. It must answer the question, why? But when we take infinite trouble to give it a beautiful form, no reason has to be assigned." End quote. Tagore's reading of Keats's Ode on a Grecian Art may come to our mind where a similar position is assumed by him. It also reminds us of the age-old antithesis between dolce and utile, beauty and utility. For Tagore, the tracing of the process of thought is a cognitive act insofar as the product or the end result justifies the process. But at the same time, he is fully aware that creativity is not a deterministic phenomenon, that it is neither predictive nor can it be deduced by empirical tasting. For him, the first and the most vital counter in the process of creativity is the creation of personality. Quote, "Our personality is our own field of creation." End quote. Now, here you can well surmise that personality, the word personality, is being used in different connotation of the term, that's sure. But we find at least two definitions of the concept of personality in his writings. In What is Art of Personality, 1917, the trait is seen as an expression of the personal man who is free from all necessities. In the same article, he proceeds further to analyze the quality of surplus in man, delicate vein, a fine excess, retaining the inmost truth of the event. And I have deliberately used the word vein because that gives a ring of Shelley's defense. Wells after wells may be undrawn, but the inmost naked truth never exposed. Between the two lies a delicate vein, a fine excess retaining the inmost truth of the event. Such exaggerations in expression, amplifications of feelings contained within the limits of authenticity become truly creative. But Tagore was no less apprehensive of the attractions for vanity of performance, quote unquote, or antics of cleverness, quote unquote, which at some points of time became fashionable, claiming creativity and originality as it did in his Vertikapya, or the rehashes of the own and quote poetry of the decadent Sanskrit literature as compiled in Subhashita Ratnakosha by Vidyadhara, or even those of the Vaishnava poets after the late 16th century. In modern times, he noticed a deliberately marked tendency towards being peculiar in order to be different and to attract attention. Tagore would remonstrate at once, peculiarity is not personality. Though in general, Tagore does not differentiate between the creative realms of arts and science, there seems to lurk at the back of his mind a kind of reservation against the elements of creativity in science, particularly during the early years of the 20s, particularly 1920-21 of the last century, in the aftermath of the First World War. And here are two quotes from him. One, science had its true sphere in analyzing this world as a construction, just as a grammarian has his legitimate mission in analyzing the syntax of a poem. But the world as a creation is not a construction. It is also more than its syntax. It's a poem, which we are apt to forget when, by exclusive attention, grammar takes complete possession of our mind. Or, the second one, a picture is a creation because it is the harmony of many lines related to one another. An engineer's plan is not a picture because the lines there are bound to each other by some external necessity. End quote. One may feel tempted to debate. The syntax of the plan is not the finite expression of an idea or feeling. But when a poetic artifact is created or a structural edifice is built on the basis of these, they do reflect the personality of the creators. The rhyme patterns of the Irish melodies or the Paysan cantos of Konica or Punascha, the structures of Louvre or the Sydney Opera House, of Taj Mahal or the Mausoleum of Mao, do certainly differ, but they reflect the ideational identity of the respective creators. Tagore might have approved of the application of science, might not have approved the application of science as display of power and dominance, but had never had deprecated the scientific spirit, this is also within quotes, that lies at the root of inventions, the counterpart of creativity in scientific parlance. Tagore admitted unequivocally, and I quote, but through it all, scientific spirit, there must have been some current of deeper desire, which constantly contradicted the cult of power and indicated a world of inner good, infinitely more precious than material gain. Its voice was not strong at first, nor was it heeded by the majority of the people, but its influence, like life within the seed, was silently working. End quote. On the compositional level, however, can be discerned some sets of processes that lead to creativity in Tagore's literary career in diverse ways. At least 4 types of processes come to the fore. 1. Invention of new content and form. 2. Recombination of various elements into a new mode and method. 3. Interaction with works of the past masters and younger contemporaries. And 4. Formation and expression of a new vocabulary. The first 3 of these may be taken as examples of what Arthur Koestler formulated as biassociation in his celebrated and pathfinding work on creativity, The Act of Creation, published in 1964. According to him, it connects, quote, connects previously unconnected matrices of experience, end quote, and goes on further to explain matrices as, quote, any ability, habit, or skill, any pattern of ordered behavior governed by a code of fixed rules, end quote. Matrices of experience are naturally multi-level for him, and bifurcation takes place when the levels interact and intersect. In being so, we will surmise a kind of inevitability of, not only possibility of, mobility in experience levels. Otherwise, these might run on parallel planes, free from any contact, convergence or relation being established among them.
I now invite Professor Indrani Mukhopadhyay, chairperson for this session, to deliver her remarks.
As well. All of us have been amply rewarded with the excellent discourses presented in this session. Of course, in other sessions also. I thank the Visva-Bharati Study Circle for inviting me. I thank the Vice Chancellor for his grand idea of integrating music and dance with other disciplines also. Actually, wisdom cannot be divided into various departments of the university. There are subtle interrelations among them. Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore highly held such a lofty idea of disinterested pursuit of knowledge. This is the object of Visva-Bharati. Thank you once again. Wish you all the best. Namaskar.
Our formal business sessions have now been concluded. But today is a very special day for Visva-Bharati. And this session is a very, very special occasion to commemorate and to felicitate an individual who has been an integral part of Visva-Bharati, an integral aspect of the art scenario in India and the globe. It is a very proud moment for all of us to have here today Padma Vibhushan, Sri KG Subramanyan, Manida to all of us, who needs no introduction to this audience. And we are, on behalf of Visva-Bharati, so privileged to have an occasion to felicitate him. I would now invite Professor KG Subramanyan to the dais. For this session, I would also like to invite Professor Raman Shiv Kumar, who will be chairing this special session of felicitation. For the felicitation, I'd like to invite on stage the Upacharya Visva-Bharati, Professor Sushanta Datta. We're all proud to be part of this special moment.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
In honoring Professor KG Subramanyan, I think Visva-Bharati is being honored. Professor Subramanyan received Padma Vibhushan this year, for which he was felicitated indeed in many functions, including one in Kala Bhavan that I attended. But we thought today and yesterday being very special to Visva-Bharati's celebration of the 150th year of Tagore's birth anniversary, as well as 90 plus year of its own existence, we would on behalf of Visva-Bharati, offer him our own gratitude and felicitations, and that's what we're gathered here for. You know, I have been here for less than 6 months, and I actually know Manida even for a shorter period of time. So when I was asked to say a few words, I was scratching my head to figure out what exactly I should talk about. And in trying to find answer to this question, you of course put your own self into the picture, into the equation, and you ask yourself, what are the attributes of Manida that I may have, I may want to have, and I know that I don't have at all. So you take or you make your own conclusions about some of these qualities that I would mention about Manida. His looks, he has very good looks. Especially his twinkling eyes with a touch of naughtiness. Second is his wit, his sense of humor. Even in this short period of time, I've been to his home after he got this award, and in other occasions when I've met him, I've found him to be extremely, extremely humorous. His articulation, his no-nonsense approach, thing that I definitely don't have, and which is what I was asking Ashok Bhomik about. So tell me, despite all these things, and Manida's great wit, intellect, creativity, etc., but he seemed to be a very patient person. I mean, he deals with situations with great aplomb, and he seems to be showing enormous amount of tolerance for others. So Ashok Bhomik said, you know, Manida is now 88 years old, you should have seen him at your age. You know, today, in this afternoon, we heard a very eloquent lecture by Leela Sampson, who brought out what it means to be an Indian. And I was thinking, this is another attribute of KG Subramanyan, who was born at Tamilian, was actually a Palghati. You know, Palghat is a place in Kerala where some Tamil Brahmins escaped Tamil Nadu and settled there, a very exclusive place. Our own governor also comes from Palghat. But he came out of that place. He worked and studied in many, many different places of India. He married a Punjabi. He lived in Shantiniketan. Now he lives in Baroda. His daughter Uma is married in a Gujarati family. So he is pan-Indian. He encapsulates the spirit of India. And this is actually quite remarkable because people may not realize what it means to work and work for institutions in India. You know, so I'll come to another attribute. When he was here in the winter and he was trying to give finishing touches to his murals, I'd see him like at 7:30 in the morning. I said, well, you know, when can I see you again? Let's say around 8:15 or 8:30. He said, you come to Kalabhavan, I'll be already there. And he was working for hours together on his unfinished mural, which is now finished. And that's the kind of commitment and dedication that actually is captured by his personality. And here I would like to say something about my own experience in India. Please forgive me for injecting these personal episodes. You see, my wife and I lived in North America 4 years in Long Island area as a PhD student and 2 years in Pittsburgh doing postdoctoral work in Carnegie Mellon. And we came back, our first job was in the Department of Atomic Energy in Kalpakkam, 80 kilometers south of Chennai, about 5-6 kilometers south of Mamallapuram. earlier called Mahabalipuram. And I'd like to share with you something. So when we were in North America, we were quite pained to see how chauvinistic Indian communities are. The Bengalis would only interact with Bengalis. The Tamilians will interact only with Tamilians. The Gujaratis will interact with Gujaratis. And we abhorred that. We actually did not participate in any Bongo Sanskriti Sammelan in North America. Only once we got trapped into a Saraswati Puja celebration in Columbia University on Broadway because our friends got us invited there. But when we came back to India, and having lived in Kalpakkam, then in Hyderabad for more than 5 years, in Hyderabad for another 5 years, we have had many more friends who are from outside Bengal than we ever had either in Calcutta, of course not, and even in North America. And it is this pan-Indianism, and I worked for a department where there were other Palgatis, of course, P.K. Iyengar, and Satyamurthy, of course, is from Karnataka, and this is where I first met Vikasana, my dear friend. So we lived in, and that was India. That is India, and KG Subramanyan represents that. So so he's not clannish at all. I find that non-resident Indians, actually I call them NRBs, non-resident Bengalis, are much more clannish than Bengalis working and living in India. So I would therefore hope that Shantiniketan would extricate itself from any kind of clannishness, because our founder, Tagore, did not believe in any clannishness. He wanted to open the door of this university to people from all over the world. Some names have cropped up in the discussions yesterday and today. Elmhurst, Dinabandhu Andrews. Then I have been in correspondence with Professor Tanchung's father, Professor Tanchung, whose father was here, Japanese scholars, so many of them. And that's what attracted KG Subramanyan here, I think. But of course, he will tell you that when he arrived, Tagore was not in the scene, and that probably gave him a better perspective on what Visva-Bharati is all about. So happy returns also to Shantiniketan, and also many more years of very productive and creative time.
It's a great honor to be asked to chair this session in which Visva-Bharati is honoring Professor KG Subramanyan, more commonly and affectionately known as Manida, on this campus. However, I also feel a little awkward to speak formally about him, not only because I know most of you know him well, some have known him for longer years than I have known him. And also it is difficult to talk objectively of someone who has played a big role in shaping you. So it is with this mixed feelings that I stand here, and I shall try to speak about him as an artist. As many of us already know, that for an artist of his stature, he came into the art field almost by accident. Born in Kerala in the early 20s, he had a keen interest in art. From his childhood, however, he decided to study art only after an initial engagement with Gandhian activism and a short term in the prison for participating in the Quit India movement. If the British government hadn't debarred him from government institutions, perhaps he should have completed his studies in economics at the Presidency College and never been here and never been an artist. So it's an accident or a fortuitous, blessing that brought him in 1944 to Shantiniketan. This also was for him a movement from the Gandhian orbit to the orbit of Rabindranath. Although his coming to art might have been a bit fortuitous, his coming to this institution was more a matter of intellectual disposition. The accident played a role, but there was already an intellectual disposition. Even before he went to college in Madras, he had discovered Nandalal in the pages of the Modern Review in a small village library in Kerala, and was drawn to his work. Added to this, his early readings of Tagore and Kumarasamy while still in his high school led to the discovery of a larger worldview in their writings, which attracted him and so helped him to gravitate towards Shantiniketan. He arrived in Shantiniketan, as the Vice Chancellor just said, 3 years after Rabindranath's death. But in his mentors in Kalabhavan, Nandalal, Vinod Bihari, and Ramkinkar, he found 3 artists who had internalized the breadth of Rabindranath's vision. From them he learned to see art as a response to social and personal needs for communication and expression. Perhaps outside Kalabhavan and perhaps outside the educational framework that Nandalal had worked out, these 2 ideas, communication and expression, were seen as mutually exclusive. But here he learned them to put them together, to see them together, and to seek a perspective on art which has a cultural rather than a professional horizon. Thus, at a time when many of his contemporaries in the post-independence scenario pitched for an aggressive individualism, he perceived a continuing relevance of the art craft and expression communication continuum Nandalal envisaged, and pursued linguistic versatility as an ideological alternative to individualistic style. Chopin, when he was speaking, quoting Rabindranath, he said, peculiarity is not personality. But the 40s artist thought that peculiarity was personality, and probably Manitha was one of the very few who thought otherwise. While most of his contemporaries worked in a single medium and in a single style, he did works in a variety of mediums and techniques, with a kind of enhanced cross-pollination between them. Thus, he did paintings structured with the communicational efficacy of consummate design, and he did painted and printed textiles and woven sculptures with the aesthetic subtlety and expressive economy of art. He also designed toys which were inventive, expressive, and witty. He wrote and illuminated books for children in which text and image extended each other. And he did murals in which details and the aggregate played hide and seek of image and meaning. Through all this, he amplified his expressive reach from year to year and decade to decade by extending his communicational range. In fact, in the 60s, when most of his contemporaries were beginning to fade away from the Indian art scene, Manitha emerged as one of the most vital artists. And since then, he has been growing in strength. His presence on the Indian art scene has been growing in strength. Besides being one of the most versatile among modern Indian artists, like his mentors, he also combines the roles of an artist, designer, teacher, and thinker, and make them mutually enriching. His versatility as a practitioner enriches his perspicacity as a connoisseur and vice versa. For instance, his familiarity with modern and traditional practices in art and craft, rare among artists and even rare among art scholars, adds to the expressive strategies of his art and to the intellectual dimension of his writing. And more importantly, he does this with refreshing lucidity and without becoming pedantic. This has helped Manitha to combine an enduring vision and ethics with continuous innovation. As a result, his recent works, done with scintillating spontaneity, are not only more thought-provoking and celebratory, teasing and subversive, empathetic and irreverent, and more expressive and complex than anything he has done in the past, but they are also some of the most vital visual art done in India today. This has come partly from his engagement with the world and partly from the way he moves from one level of communication